So, good evening from Mumbai. I'm Charles Assisi here from Team Founding Fuel. And thank you for tuning into this conversation between Nandan Nilekani and Harish Chavla. And I can see that an overwhelming number of people have registered for this session from all over the world. So, may I request you to introduce yourselves, get to know each other, comment, and ask questions on that chat box as well, because I can see that there are some very fine minds logged in. My colleague N.S. Ramnath is going to be anchoring the chat box there, and he's going to keep Haresh and Nandan posted on the questions that are top of mind for you. Now, Haresh is someone whom I've known for a few years. And if I can describe him in one line, it is this. He's a man with an uncanny knack to look at the future from perspectives that most of us don't think about. And that is why his annual trend spotting column is a much awaited one. And the third installment was published on Founding Fuel last week. And I'm sure most of you have logged in, have read it as a precursor to this conversation, because all of us want to know what 2021 may look like. Um, we wanted 2020 to be just over and done with. That is a year we wished never happened. But what will 2021 look like? Now, while Haresh has offered his take, how does Nandan see the world? Now, this much I can say of Nandan. Each time I've heard him speak, I've come back feeling energized because he's someone who can imagine and articulate very clearly what to watch out for and how to prepare for it. That is why I cannot wait for this conversation to begin. So I'm going to pass the baton on to Haresh, and I'll be back in a while with some updates from Founding Fuel because there is much else happening after this conversation between Nandan and Haresh gets done with. So over to you, Haresh.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Charles, for the intro. Hi, Nandan.
Hi,
I
hi,
think
Harish. Good to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. So I'll just give a bit of a introduction on Nandan. Uh, the year last year has been really, really tough for all of us. It's been a year of upheaval, and I can give you, in my personal situation, there was clearly panic. My son studies in the US, and to get him back, I mean, that's the beginning of the pandemic. I remember that the lockdown wasn't so important as much as getting him on the last commercial flight out of the US and then suddenly grappling with the sufferings of the companies. I'm invested in several startups and through our private equity fund as well. As to business, in some cases, completely vanished, and large scale restructuring took place. The other side was it that some of the startups, which are pure tech driven, were SaaS companies, suddenly saw ballooning business. So it's been a year of contrast. Everything has gone to the extreme. A lot of uncertainty. In fact, some of the things that had to be learned again. I teach a MBA class in FEGen in Bombay on digital transformation, and I've been doing it for almost 3 years now, and it's a breeze to run that class. But this time, I was afraid to walk into a room on the Zoom call with no feedback from the students, no idea where they're getting what you're doing. So I had to sit down and actually learn how to conduct a class online, and it was completely, revealing that some of the old methods that we've been using for teaching are completely irrelevant. You can get them to engage, you can get them to learn from each other, you can get them to do pre-work. So it's a transformational time for all of us. How has COVID been for you, Nandan?
No, I think I think very similar. I mean, in the first lockdown, it was very, very intense because we were really at home, stuck, and doing all our own things. And our son was in London, and we didn't bring him back, so he spent 9 months, and he also came back by the last flight in December from London. So we had a similar experience. But I saw this as an opportunity to do something. For example, I focused a lot on fitness, going for walks, reading a lot, connecting a lot more with my family. So I think in some sense, while it was very stressful, I think, I tend to be an optimist. So I look at always the bright side of things, or how can I take advantage of a situation. So, I think after 9 months, all of us feel much relieved that we have come out of it so far reasonably unscathed.
Yes, absolutely. I think, and that's one of the themes that I we'll pick up in our discussion that, for India, is it just a crisis or is it a opportunity wrapped up in a crisis? And that's what, so some of the themes I want to pick up with you so that we get the audience to understand where we are headed on this discussion is three themes really largely. One is, how is pandemic really resetting the world? It's resetting the world in terms of what's happening to cooperation across the world. In the sense, every digital transformation has now become as of yesterday. So either you're digital or you're dying. I mean, that's one of the themes that I want to discuss. And what does it does for India? The second theme within that is digital within India. I think that is something that we are not yet peeking into. You have a fantastic vantage point there. So that's a theme we'll pick up. The second thing is that how do companies and managers and leaders really grapple with the changes? It's not as if this is something that's ordinary. I mean, we're hit with extraordinary circumstances. And some of those circumstances will actually, get revealed as time passes. We are just facing the first initial brunt. So that's the second theme. And the third theme is that we are seeing technology now overwhelm our lives. It's no longer a part of our life. Our lives are conducted through it. And therefore, there is this tension between society, government, and technology. And that's a theme I'd like to explore. So we can start with the first one. Nandan, you've been 40 years, 4 decades, watching the transformation of IT, whether it started with EDP managers, CIOs, then digital heads in firms and companies across the world. As you started this wave with Infosys of India really putting ourselves on the world map, what do you see happening across the world on the digital front?
First of all, you're dating me, Harish, with all this 40 years and all that. But I think the fundamental thing is, this is something I have never seen before, and none of us have seen before. We did have a digital adoption going on in the world over the last few years, thanks to the cloud and AI and consumerization of IT experience and big data and so on. But this is a dramatic acceleration of those trends. And I think that's the important thing. The trends were already there, but there's a huge acceleration. And as you have talked about in your trend spotting brilliant column, we have the so-called K-type recovery, which is some companies that are in the proximity business, like hotels, airlines, tourism, have been deeply affected. But some companies that are in the remote business, that means they can do work anywhere from home or whatever, they are booming. And therefore, I think there's been a divergence between two types of companies that has been dramatically brought about by COVID. And the lesson from this is you need to have a digital strategy, and you need to have what I call as optionality in strategy. If you look at retail, a lot of companies have gone, some of the great names have gone into bankruptcy, Neiman Marcus and so on. And some companies like Walmart and Target and Home Depot have done very well. And the reason is simply that they had a good e-commerce approach. They figured out delivery at home. They figured out pick up in the store. They figured out pick up on the curbside. So companies that had more optionality in their strategy really came out much ahead. The same thing is those companies who are invested in the infrastructure of working from home were able to work from home very quickly. So you take sector by sector, where you had optionality of strategy, thanks to technology, people have emerged ahead. So I think this is the big thing. And also I think this has brought home to boards and CEOs that digital is no longer an option. Digital is an essence to survival, and whatever happens post-pandemic, we will continue to depend a lot on digital. And that has fundamentally changed the mindset of companies and leaders around the world.
Yeah, so you're saying, in a sense, digital actually gives a company optionality, frankly. If you're digitally ready, you can spin on a dime, in a sense.
Yeah, so if you're a retailer and you both have a physical presence and an online presence, and you have store pickup and curbside pickup, it provides all kinds of options to your customers. If you're a company which can get all your employees to work from home within one week, then suddenly you can continue to service your clients. So when you look at every sector, companies that have built this, for example, McDonald's has a very good drive-through experience, and they were able to do very well because people would just drive through, pick up the burger and go. So people who have sort of built these multiple ways to reach the customer, they have benefited hugely.
Right. Okay. And how do you see the India opportunity in all this? So two angles here. One is that we've been so far exporters of talent in a sense and take on projects. So is there a new opportunity for us, like a new Y2K moment? And the second thing is, how do we contrast ourselves with the India-China situation as well? Because frankly, if you see, the world is opening up into two internets. There is the open internet, one can call it, and the Chinese internet, and we have a huge audience base of actually consumers plus huge coder base actually that we can provide to this open internet. How do you see that shaping up?
Well, to make it a little more complicated, Harish, I think there are 4 internets. I mean, there is the American internet, which is the classical one, which is a laissez-faire internet that allowed all these phenomenal companies in the US to come up. There's the Chinese internet, where behind the firewall, they created domestic champions like Alibaba and Tencent and so on. There's the European internet, which is much more regulation oriented because they have been the leaders in GDPR and Digital Services Act, digital taxation, and so on. And then the Indian internet, where thanks to the India Stack and other technology, we'll talk about it later, is fundamentally a far more inclusive version of the internet. So I believe there are 4 models of the internet that are competing for attention, and we can discuss that later. On the China thing, clearly, I think while China has built extraordinary companies, we are seeing a bit of the issue. The Ant IPO got stopped at the last minute, and now there's a lot of regulation coming on the fintech companies. So I think they are going through their own challenges. And this is actually part of a bigger theme, whether it's Europe, India, China, or the US. Regulators are taking more interest. And again, we can talk about that later. But India itself, I think, is a huge, huge opportunity, both for incumbent companies to adopt technology in a very big way, as well as for a whole generation of startups to come about, which also you talked about in your great column. So I think I personally feel that this is a decisive moment in the digitization of India, and all the investments in technology, infrastructure, policy that we have done is now poised for takeoff.
So should there be some policy effort in the sense, is there a new war cry could be coded in India? I mean, we've got millions of graduates who really are looking for employment. The women workforce participation is lower, so it could be she codes for India, for example. Because I'm saying that, is there a moment where everybody needs to come together and really use the next, let's say, half a decade to transform what we can do for the world?
Oh, absolutely. I think there are different aspects, right? One is clearly India for the world. And India for the world, obviously, digital transformation of the world could be driven in some sense from India and by companies of Indian base. And you're already seeing some of that happening. Then India could be a great place for future SaaS companies, because I think we're already seeing a lot of very good SaaS companies that are growing dramatically during this pandemic, many unicorns coming. So yes, India could be, the digital transformation agent for the world. And also, I think at this point, a much more trusted country where people have faith that, people will play by the rules and do international business well and so on. So I think India can definitely do that. And then there's the Indian opportunity. I think one of the things which you have talked about is the transaction economy coming. And I think this is a very important strategic point that you have made, Harish, because the way I think about this is the next decade is India going from a prepaid economy to a postpaid economy. And what I mean by that is the prepaid economy was the great contribution of the mobile companies. The mobile companies were able to reach every nook and corner of the country because they didn't have identity of people at that time. This is pre-Aadhaar, and they didn't have a way of doing digital payments. But they came out of the simple concept that you put money into the account and then use the talk time, the prepaid minutes approach. And that's how the mobile revolution grew. So the prepaid economy was what drove that part. But as we get to digital, as people get to digital payments, as people get to credit histories, as people get to digital transactions, they will now be ready for credit. And therefore, the move of the Indian economy from a prepaid to a postpaid is going to drive a huge cycle of consumption as well as growth, both consumption leading to buyers getting credit and data allowing suppliers to get credit. So in both sides of the commerce transaction get credit, then it creates a boost to the system. So I see that prepaid to postpaid in the next decade.
Yeah, so Nandan, frankly, and that's the next theme. You've been working on the India Stack idea for several years. My sense is that its real fruition or its real utility showed up in the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
It allowed us to function, frankly, and it has become a bedrock from which companies and startups have risen. How do you see that vision coming together? Has it come together fully, or what are the other elements we can still expect to play out?
Well, I think it's actually about a decade since I joined the government to do the Aadhaar project. So Aadhaar has been a huge thing, and it does billions of authentications every month. And Aadhaar-enabled payments was one of the key fundamental foundations during the pandemic, which allowed the government to transfer money to a few, millions of people, and they could withdraw the money in their village using an Aadhaar-enabled payment system, which allowed you to just use your finger, do an authentication, and get your money from the local business correspondent. So this was actually a fundamental bedrock of what allowed the poor and vulnerable to get access to government benefits. So I think that's just one example of how it benefited. But I think UPI has been another great example. December did 2.2 billion transactions. And I'm involved because I'm the advisor on study and innovation to NPCI, which is an extraordinary organization that has laid the foundations for India's payments. And they are actually now building an architecture. And Dilip Asbe, the CEO, is on record saying that they would like to go to 1 billion transactions a day. That's extraordinary. Oh. And they're building all this domestically, open source, highly scalable, high volume, low cost transaction. I think India has a great payment system. And so on. I'll give you one more example in payments. 10 years back, I was asked by Transport Minister Kamal Nath to head a committee on how do we fix the toll system. And the committee I headed came out with a report suggesting an RFID tag system linked to a payment instrument. And that's what led to FASTag. And FASTag today does something like 2,000 crores of collections every month on the toll system. That's 24,000 crores of annualized revenue on tolls. And it has also helped to clean up the collection and therefore makes our roads more viable to be financed and to be sold, BOT and all that. So, all these last 10 years has made a huge difference. Now, in the coming 10 years, I think one clearly will be what you call as embedded lending, which you are referred to in your column. So the use of the account aggregator infrastructure by RBI, people being able to use their own data. So now if I'm a small business, I can use my GST data to get a loan because the GST I filed my invoices. Using the OCEN infrastructure, I can connect lenders, borrowers, and what we call as loan service providers. So tomorrow, you wrote about these young companies like Dukaan or Khata Book or all these guys who do taxes and so on. All these companies could actually start using embedded lending to give the small business the loan because the transaction details are with them, and they could just act as the bridge between the borrower and the lender. So in some sense, the revival of the Indian economy in a much more democratized fashion is going to be driven by digital technology and transaction-based lending and so on. So that's a big thing which I see. And of course, the other big thing which I see is AI. I think we are seeing as these huge data, for example, today the Supreme Court is using AI and neural machine translation to translate all the legal documents from English to Hindi, Hindi to English, English to Tamil, Tamil to English. That's quite extraordinary that the Supreme Court has been so far-sighted. Similarly, in the GST, and Ajay Bhushan Pandey, who I worked with at UIDAI, who's now the finance secretary, talked about how they're using analytics to find out who all are using fake invoices. So suddenly the tax revenues will go up. So we're seeing we're starting to seeing the penetration of these technologies into every aspect of life, not just what you see at the consumer side, Zoom and all that, but also on the business side.
So, you talked about earlier, before we started this discussion, talked about the whole vaccine program as well and how data will be useful to run that. Could you tell us something more about that? Our viewers will be really interested in that.
Yeah, so to me, one of the most important things will be how quickly we can get the economy back on track. And obviously, now that we do have vaccines, and India is the vaccine capital of the world, and we have great companies like Serum Institute, Biologically, Bharat Biotech, and so on, all building vaccines. We have the domestic manufacturing of vaccines, and the government is, of course, rolling out a completely tech-based platform called CoWIN, and along with that, everybody will get a digital certificate. So when you get your vaccination done, wherever you get it done, you will get a digital certificate that is QR coded, signed, secure, authenticatable, etc. And once we start issuing these certificates, the country starts issuing the certificates, then that will also make it easier. For example, when you go back to work, you can just show your digital certificate in an app, or if you go to a restaurant, you can show your app, or you're catching a plane or a bus. So suddenly these digital certificates of vaccination will also become something that will enable us to get the economy back on track much faster. So how quickly we vaccinate, and that's why I've been proposing that we build architecture like Aadhaar, which can do 10 million vaccinations a day, so that we can get over this hump very fast. So that these are all ideas that are being discussed, and the government is very open and receptive to such ideas.
So tell me, in this, in this new frictionless world where we are able to reach all these people, see, the earlier, software and technology generation of India was built without government intervention when Infosys and all these companies went abroad. Now, and we are seeing now EdTech, you can now deliver teaching English, teaching, running classes. You're seeing a bunch of EdTech companies that are creating inexpensive software designed to be paid in micro sachet fashion, pay 5 rupees for a lesson, 10 rupees for a lesson. So what should the role of government now be? Now that the rails are in place, should we let the entrepreneurs solve these problems? Should we incentivize them? What should we do?
Look, all the rails that we have put in India in the last decade have been very clear that the government will put the fundamental digital rails, open it up through APIs, and allow innovation to proceed on that. So, for example, the Aadhaar authentication is an API which you can use anywhere as long as you're registered with the UIDAI. The Aadhaar eKYC can be used by a bank and insurance companies to do a KYC in 2 minutes. The UPI API is available, so that's why you're seeing all these great products from Google, WhatsApp, Amazon, PhonePe, and Paytm, and so on. Correct. So, account aggregator again is an API-based thing that anybody can use. So, the FASTag again can be a platform for not only for paying toll on the highway, it can be used for parking charges in the city, or if you want to introduce congestion parking in Nariman Point or Fort or BKC or Brigade Road in Bangalore or whatever, you can have dynamic congestion pricing for vehicles. So everything is where government provides the fundamental digital rail, the backbone, and APIs allow people to hook into that. So that's the beauty of the India model.
So I know my question therefore is, if you talk about all this, my view is that we have to be extremely optimistic about our future now. I see this whole gloom and doom, which was there in the initial phases of lockdown, initial phases of COVID. We didn't know where we were headed. But now that the haze is clearing, should the view change? Because frankly, it's brand new opportunities. Access costs have gone down, credit costs have gone down, friction has gone down. Is there a way for really important for all of us to relook at how India is post-pandemic?
Yeah, the whole problem, as you know, as you're a very smart investor, it's all about timing. Yes, absolutely, the future is positive. Now, is that future uptake going to happen in 3 months or 6 months or 1 year? I don't know, and we can't predict. But I think we have to see the point that you made also, which is, see, the rest of the world, the Western countries, built the internet private sector on advertising revenue. So it was an advertising-led model because there was a few $100 billion of advertising money spent on television and magazines and newspapers, and that migrated to the digital advertising world, which is how Google and Facebook and others built these extraordinary companies. India does not have an advertising model. Our total advertising spend may be less than $10 billion a year, and digital advertising is $2-3 billion a year, which is essentially between Google, Facebook, Star, and Amazon. So there's not really a place. But because we have what you described, this transaction economy, the ability to do high volume, zero cost payment transactions using auto debit, embedded lending, our future will be driven by a transaction-led boom, and credit will go from being given to a few people who then abscond to London or whatever. It will go to millions of individual consumers and small businesses and democratize. And that is the way which is now going to start. Now, that's what we have to be optimistic about. Whether that wave starts 3 months or 9 months, I don't know, because there are too many variables. But fundamentally, from this current credit crisis, NPAs and all that stuff, you're going to have a new credit economy, which is going to be high volume, low cost, small ticket, flow based and not asset based, much more friendly for new businesses and new consumers. This is a revolution in the making. The question is, when will it happen? That's all.
No, absolutely. I know. I can see, not many people have realized that UPI has converted your bank into a wallet. Very simple. It's become frictionless. The largest and the oldest banks in the country have become as agile as one of the new age wallets because they have the platform to just deliver services on. So now comes the next question. In this whole frictionless world, how do companies reshape themselves? Because we, look at a sector. You have Jio on one side, which is completely, let's say, burned the bridges with the old economy. And then you have the ITCs and the Levers and the PNGs and the Britannias. And frankly, there is this, war coming up now, that one can visualize, which I've talked about in my piece. How should, leaders, how should companies reorganize themselves? How should leaders look at the crisis and react? I mean, you've been through crisis multiple times and you've stepped in and helped your companies through the crisis, especially Infosys. What should be, let's say, the magic potion that, we need our leaders to drink when they look at this new India?
No, I mean, at one level, obviously, it's a greater digitization, and that's fairly obvious. But I think more importantly, for a consumer product company, if you're an FMCG company or what they call in the US, a CPG company, then you don't know much about your consumers, because the historical model was you sold to wholesalers, who sold to distributors, who sold to retailers, and retailers sold to consumers. Whereas if you're a direct-to-consumer business like Amazon or Flipkart or all that, I know everything about your consumers. So the information disadvantage of traditional, FMCG companies is they don't know anything about the consumers. So they will have to find a way to have a digital supply chain which talks up to the consumer without offending the current distribution. They don't want channel conflict, and figure out in real time what the consumers are buying, not buying, what they like. So getting that direct to consumer right, not necessarily only in a sales sense, but also in a data sense, that is going to be the big issue for large FMCG companies.
So, is it, how do they bring digital to the center of the organization? Now, no longer is possible to have, a digital organization that's outside your core, let's say, operations.
Oh, yeah. This is not about a bunch of guys deciding business strategy and then calling the IT guy and saying, okay, develop this software.
Yeah.
Technology, you have to be digital first. Every CEO and leader has to understand the strategic implications of the choices that he or she is making. And it requires digital literacy, the impact of technology on business models, the important role of data acquisition. How do we use data to get insights, AI? So, I mean, I don't think you can run a modern business today in any sector without a deep understanding of how tech will change the business.
But are you seeing this happen, or you see, this is going to be a difficult phase for many companies over the next 10 years? I mean, companies that have been around for 60 years, will they be relevant if they don't do dramatic
Harish, I'm in my house in Kormangala, Bangalore. I don't know what people are doing, but but you're right. I mean, look, and I think I have a better experience dealing with the global clients, and they are very much on the ball. But one thing also we should remember is cybersecurity. One of the lessons we have learned in the pandemic is this is a great opportunity for both people who have commercial interest to get ransomware, or countries doing espionage. I think all this digital has to be backed by very, very strong cybersecurity constructs. We saw what happened with the whole SolarWinds episode, where software upgrades had the stuff inside them. The malware came from the upgrade. So I think while it's very good to be optimistic about the digital sort of reinvention, how to make it secure and not breached by all kinds of bad actors is going to be a big challenge. So that is also something that boards are very much concerned about.
Okay, so how do you see the role of government now? In a sense, we are seeing this big tech company, we're seeing this whole wave of regulation across the world coming back at them, and really they are in a position to transform or change minds of people for elections. We are seeing all of this news, bad news of technology. So one is just, so there is crime and money is stolen, but they are now influencing our minds. So how does that tension play out? Even, for example, on the vaccine, it's technology, the mRNA technology versus how much testing has happened, what the implications are. There is this fear of technology that's developing from multiple fronts. One is about data privacy. The second is the ability of the large companies to actually smother small companies. How do you see that whole battle going on?
I mean, there are many complex things here, Harish. One is, of course, antitrust issues, monopoly, companies using the dominant status to grab adjacent markets. The second is the whole risk of fake news and polarization and elections and foreign actors influencing your elections through feeding stuff into the fake news engine. Then there's a whole battle between free speech and censorship. So this is a very complex space. But what we are seeing now, whether it's the US, whether it's Europe, whether it's China, or whether it's India, I think governments are now far more aware of the issues. I mean, I don't know if they saw the report of the House Committee on Big Tech. Very professional. I mean, the people who wrote that knew what they were talking about. So, so clearly the ability of governments also to understand where this is going is very high. In India in particular, I must commend both the government and the regulators because they are finding the right balance between innovation and regulation. Just to give you examples, RBI has been at the forefront of account aggregator and UPI, extraordinary support from RBI. SEBI has been at the forefront of this ASBA thing, where I can I can block my money for an IPO using UPI. Again, great stuff. TRAI under Ram Sevak Sharma came out with the Vani system, which is again about making access to internet through Wi-Fi, a ubiquitous thing. The finance ministry is applying AI and big data to catch tax fraud. The Supreme Court is using AI to make reduce pendency. So I think India is very unusual in the fact that governments and non-profits like NPCI or Supreme Court or regulators have all figured out how technology can be used for India's future, which puts us again, going back to your optimism scenario, we are well placed to take advantage of new trends.
So one question there that comes to my mind is that, we also are, now that we are an English internet, that's why we started. So we have all the global giants here. So is this fear of digital colonization that, that people have been talking about, that frankly, 95% plus of our traffic goes through Google. Most of our messages go on WhatsApp. Most of our, people use Facebook and Instagram. How will that tension play out? Because that's also a point of, let's say conflict, because frankly, these companies have capital at very low cost, near zero. India is a huge market for them now. Their growth over the world is stopped. China has kept them out. So they will want this prize. How do you see this battle or this pull and push play out?
Well, I think you take it market by market. I mean, clearly in the messaging market, you have the whole Facebook family of products, and they are pretty dominant. In search, it's all Google and so on. But as I said, all these are finally advertising-led markets. So advertising-led markets in India don't have that much traction because the revenue from advertising is just $2-3 billion in digital advertising. Therefore, India being a transaction market, now the transaction market of India, and you talked about it so eloquently in your column, the combination of a few 100 million internet users on the mobile internet, the smartphone, the Indian language, the video stuff, voice recognition and voice commands, and low-cost payment transaction systems like UPI, along with autopay, embedded lending. So the way to think about this is India will be the world's biggest, I'm not necessarily in value, but certainly in transactions, one of the world's biggest consumer transaction-led economies. And that the advantage is not with anybody from outside. That advantage is right here, because the building blocks of that have been built here. And therefore, I believe that that's where the future is for Indian companies and Indian startups.
Okay, that's fantastic. I mean, this perspective is crucial to realize, that finally those giants are not doing operations in India in a sense. I keep talking about that they're getting their hands dirty. We've largely see one company, let's say Amazon, come and do
I think to be fair, I mean, Amazon is doing a lot of things on the ground. So is Walmart, Flipkart. So it's not entirely, and those are not going to be winner-take-all markets. Those are not going to be winner-take-all markets. We're going to have heavy competition, at least 3 to 5 players in e-commerce, vertical commerce, all that. So once you have that 3 to 5 players, then you don't have a duopoly, then it's going to be a customer is going to be king.
Okay, so let's on this optimistic note, because I think it's very important to get this message across to people that we are going to see a refurbished, reformed India. We needed crisis to get reform in the past in 91. We don't have that crisis now, so we should look at it with luckily we don't have that crisis today that we have to force ourselves through. But the digital transformation of India is really a story that needs to be told, and people need to get convinced, and really money, capital, ideas need to flow. And that's fantastic. Let's pick up some audience questions. Saundri asks, any suggestion for leaders to bring digital to the fore, but stay human at the core, given the impact on equality, diversity? I mean, we are seeing this have and have not in the digital world as well. There is this that's taking place.
No, there's no question. I mean, while digital, as I said, that's why I talked about the K-shaped recovery, right?
Yeah.
A part of the economy is booming, and the market cap is going up and all that. And part of the economy is in shambles because proximity industries like tourism, restaurants, airlines have really been hurt. So the same thing is happening in access, right? So those people who have smartphones and internet connection have access to all these things. Those who don't have these phones don't have access. That's why when you design population scale systems, you have to look at how do people with smartphones access it? How do people with feature phones access it? How do people with no phones access it? And in payments, we did that. In payments, the smartphone guys have all these cool apps they can get on their phone from Google and Paytm and all that. The feature phone guys can also use UPI. So they can now, and that's going to become better and better. So feature phone guys can also use UPI. And for the people who don't have phones, they can go to an Aadhaar-enabled payment system and withdraw and deposit money. So when you think about inclusion, you have to look at all people and make it inclusive. Now, in education, for example, the government has a program called Diksha, which is actually doing extraordinary work in the pandemic. The underlying thing for that was actually built by one of the NGOs that we support called EkStep. And that provides not only online education, but offline education, worksheet education. You can go to the local CAC and print your worksheets. So you have to think, how do you make it inclusive for people who have smartphones, people who have feature phones, and most importantly, people who don't have any phones. Now, even when you have somebody with a smartphone, suppose you're a family with one smartphone, and it's being used by the head of the family, and he's working as a chauffeur somewhere. He still has to go home for 2 hours to share that with his kids when they have Zoom class.
Absolutely.
So, it's very complicated stuff. But really what this has brought out is you have no choice but to make digital infrastructure ubiquitous, cheap, and accessible to the whole population.
So, we've gone through a tough 2020. How do you think India will look in 2030?
2030?
Yeah.
I can't predict next year, and you want me to look from 10 years from now.
Yeah.
I'm fundamentally an optimist, and sometimes my wife feels I'm an incurable optimist. I never see the downside, but that's okay. That's how it is. So I feel that while last year has been a setback, GDP decline and many more people being pushed into poverty, the digital-led reinvention of India is now going to take off in a big way. And if we can navigate this for the next decade, I mean, we're the only young country in an aging world. You can't get better than that. More people can work, more people can export, more people can make things, more people can consume things. The working age is going to be highest in the next 20 years. This is India's moment, and we really have a chance to be up there in the top tier of global economies in the next 10 years.
Thank you, Nandan. I think on this note, I mean, in this really optimistic note, because we are seeing the transformation of a nation, and frankly, our generation, which has lived back in India, we've seen every decade actually put our country into another orbit. And my sense is that this is really a multi-orbit jump that we are going to see now. Because, India 1 has progressed, but you cannot progress the country if India 2 and India 3 drag us down. There is no way for us to win or make an impact. And I think with technology, India 2 and 3 are getting the same tech as all of us are. I mean, they're getting the same technology.
All the work I've done in the last 10 years is how to get population scale universal access to technology. I want the guy in the village to be able to do a payment or do an authentication at the same way the guy in the city does it.
So thank you so much, Nandan. I think on this note, we'll end and we'll hand over to Charles. Charles?
Yeah, I mean, this has been such a fascinating session. And like I told you right at the outset, listening to Nandan always leaves me feeling completely energized. Nandan, promise me you're going to share a signed copy of your book.
Anytime for you to do anything.
I would have loved to ask you one question. So I'm just going to shoot you this question with one request. I know we are running out of time, but if there is one thing that you're most passionate about and you could change given the current circumstances, what would that be? Harish, I'm not going to let you answer that one because I know what you'll do to me.
No, I personally, on one side, I'm a great believer in the role of digital transformation in the world. So and you can see that from what I said. But I'm also deeply troubled by how social media and fake news and polarization is affecting us. And therefore, I think, to me, how do we take the best of technology at the same time encourage people and countries and companies to avoid its downside? I think that to me is very, very important. To me, that's really the fundamental theme of the next, to me, that's very, otherwise, we're going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, in the sense that people are going to get so fed up with technology that they will forget to see the good side of it.
Right. And Nandan, one more thing. What can we expect from your book, The Art of Bigfulness?
Yeah, well, basically, I'm saying that finally, we should be on top of technology and not let technology be on top of us. I mean, for example, I don't use any social media because I find it a complete time-consuming thing, and so how do we be on top of it? How do we take advantage of it, but don't subsume our life into it? No point getting up in the morning and getting angry with some WhatsApp message. Forget it. Yeah, don't waste time on that. Focus on how we can get the big picture going, and be very, very frugal about the use of the technology, and think about how we can apply it for social development. That's my trip in life anyway.
Great. Thank you so much. Harish, I know I've learned a lot from you. What would be that one piece of advice that you would have, that you are most passionate about? And if you could wave a magic wand and if you could change, what would you change?
My sense is that there are young people, and I see the young startup and founders, they are moving at such a rapid pace, actually. I mean, it's fascinating. You give them an idea, talk to them. In 3 or 4 weeks, the whole product is ready, the prototype is ready. I think that transformational change that we are seeing in the pace and the confidence in young people, if you're not in the startup community, you don't feel it. But if you are, you can, that is what I believe will just transform our nation. Right? There is a certain confidence in these people. They have the ability to execute, and they're working day and night. So it's fantastic to see that happen. The other thing is, I think education. I think the big thing that entrepreneurs will bring is, educate young Indians and get them up to speed and become global citizens. I think that's the big opportunity we have, and whatever all the stakeholders can do to get education on, which is relevant, not we need skill-based education, we need vocational education, we need people to learn English and engage with the world. So I think those are the two things I believe that are going to be extremely transformational.
Harish, I just one thing about the startup. One thing they need to learn is how to make profits and money. Because
Yes,
all the great internet companies, all of them, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Alibaba, Tencent, ByteDance, they all finally figure out how to make a great deal of money, and that's what gave them their strength. So please advise all your companies to learn how to make money also.
So, Nandan, what I've said is that we've become from a push-based digital economy, we are now a pull-based. I think in the next 2 years, you'll see these companies make money now because they will be able to charge small money. In a sense, they'll actually be able to raise.
You'll not waste time on discounts and all those cash burning activities. I agree.
I think this timing is perfect to launch a new business idea in India. I think the incumbents don't have the talent and don't have the speed. If you get the talent and you have the speed.
And a lot of the money spent in the last 10 years has been behavior change oriented. That's over now.
Correct.
That's a great point. You put that in the column.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nandan.
I'm going to ensure I'm going to ensure that all of us take that advice on social media very seriously, particularly at home. And those of you who are tuned in, like I told you right at the beginning, this is an action-packed evening for all of us on the team at Founding Fuel, because at 8 p.m. sharp, my co-founder Indrajit Gupta is going to be getting into a conversation with the very eminent professors Jagdish Sheth, Raj Sisodia, and John Usle, who have co-authored their latest book, The Global Rule of Three. And may I urge you to log in, because the login details are on your screen right now. And for those of you who have registered for this conversation between Nandan and Harish, we'll share a recording of this conversation, and the summary will follow soon after. We'll also stay connected as well and keep you posted on what else Nandan and Harish are thinking up next. And for that, all you have to do is sign up for the daily newsletter. Thank you once again, Nandan and Harish, and good night from Mumbai.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for a great show. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Nandan. Bye.